All right, peace. Peace, peace, peace. We're going to finish up what we were almost done last night after we had the little situation. So we're going to go ahead and try to get the rest in this evening after last night's little incident. So we're just going to wait a minute or two so we get some people in. And then we will wrap up what we started last night. Probably going to keep this between an hour to 2 hours. I'm not going to really go over the material. I'm just kind of going to go over the key points briefly. And then if you were here last night and you had questions, I didn't get a chance to go through any of the comments or the questions before we had our little fiasco. So we're just going to wait a minute before we begin. Peace, Brother K. Edwards. All right. Let's give it a minute or two. And then we will begin. All right. While we're waiting, again, I'll just briefly go through some quick announcements while we're still waiting for people to file in. Reference as a reminder, a couple more people emailed me, I guess last night, and I saw it today, about the event next week. Yes, you have until next Wednesday, 24th, is the cutoff. We do have to be kind of strict on that because we need a head count, exact head count, which we pretty much have one at this point. But as far as planning and knowing how many people, et cetera, so it's critical. So I did respond back to a couple of those emails. Anyway, the event, again, real quick, while we're still waiting for more people to file in, it's a 2-day event, something that we're probably going to do annually. This will be the first one. Again, the event is centered around the theme, the journey of a Black adept. We will be covering various different aspects and avenues of what that entails. And the goal is for you to walk away from that event and from that experience, being able to take something from that and be able to utilize it so it can help you on your path once you depart. So Friday, as I said before, on the 26th, there will be different presenters presenting different topics on vampirism, sex magic, Luciferianism, working with herbs. Sister Sonia will be doing a presentation on being a female, quote unquote, in the left-hand path. Those are just some of the topics that'll take place during the daytime on Friday from about 9:30ish up until about 5. We will break for lunch in the middle portion of the day. We'll have 2 15-minute breaks. When the lectures and the workshops are done, Brother Mike also has got something nice prepared. So that'll be interesting. He's doing something on the 7 Hermetic Principles, kind of a participation thing. So once that concludes, we'll meet back later that evening at 8 o'clock to perform the energy, the ritual of activating the Luciferian energy and the energy of what we call Lucifer, the Lucifer within. And as I mentioned briefly in previous vids, the ritual does work with each, connecting that energy to each portion of the chakra. There's male-female participation. There's some parts where the females will be invoking the males, and there's some that are done together in unison. All right, and that will conclude the first day. Second day, I'll be finishing it up at 12:30 with a class, the journey of the Black adept, kind of connecting it all together. Then we will meet later at the beach. We will be setting up an altar there, doing a drumming ceremony for the Igun, the Orishi, and Aloha. Okay. Once that concludes, we will have a dinner there at a restaurant on the beach, and then we will proceed to the cemetery to finish our final working for the weekend. So that's the 2-day event. again, you have until next Wednesday if you're traveling from out of state just to notify us and request an invite, briefly have a conversation with you and talk to you. Just to make sure we are on the same page, and there are certain things you will need to bring for the ritual and the working, tools that you will need for the ritual and the working. So that's the event, and anything in regards to that or consultations or readings. Also have the online classes that are going to be starting on November 10th. I know some of you have already signed up and contacted me. I'll resend that email out again, probably at the end of the week, just to remind people. So anyway, a lot of things coming up in the next couple of weeks to a month. We try to stay active throughout the year. And, in addition to our 1 month events, rituals. All right. So if any of those things you need to inquire about, in the description box is the email of all my videos. The email address is in the description box, which is khnum19@gmail.com. All right. So peace and greetings to everybody. Sister Regina, Sister Myra, what's going on? Said peace to K. Edwards. Make sure I'm not messing your name up, brother. Dumaken Rez. Hopefully I pronounced that right. All right. So now, if you weren't here last night, you might want to go watch the first video after this. Obviously, most people might be aware last night YouTube crashed. I don't know if some of you were aware of that. While we were in the midst of doing a video last night, I got through the material. I'm not going to go through everything again. So I want to make it clear. If you were not here last night, I would suggest to get the full spectrum. For time's sake, I'm not going to go through all that again. I'm just going to go through some of the key points. I would suggest you watch last night's video before YouTube crashed. So we got through the material, and then as we started to go into the chat and kind of have our discussion like we usually do as far as questions and comments, everything just crashed. At first, I thought it was something with my system or the internet. Then I checked. It was every device that I have in the house: tablets, phones, desktop, laptop. I started to see that I couldn't get on to YouTube. And then I called just to verify that it wasn't just me. I called a few people I know, and they were having the same problem. Then I wind up Googling, like probably some of you did, found out that YouTube just crashed everywhere. It was worldwide. And yeah, they didn't explain what it was, but I mean, I've seen glitches with YouTube over the years, but I've never seen it down that long. First thought that came to my mind was hackers. That's the first shit that came to my mind. Because as you know, in the last couple of weeks, there's been major issues with Facebook. So the first thought came to my mind, somebody had hacked the whole, server. But it was just crazy. So I know I didn't get a chance to get to your question. So I'm going to go over the key points of the material from last night briefly, and then we'll just kind of have an open discussion. So I'm going to keep this kind of, straight to the point. But I noticed as we started that last night, I just started seeing people dropping out of the room, and I knew something was wrong because it seemed like every minute, like within a minute or two's time, it pretty much most people either fell out or lost contact. So that's first thing that came to my mind was hackers. I thought somebody had hacked the system because there's a lot of that shit going on. I would recommend, very important, with identity theft. I want to make this is important. If you shop online, I know I'm on Amazon a lot. I can't stand going to stores and being in crowds. I only go if I have to. I love to shop online. It's convenient. The only time I physically go to a store, if it's something I really absolutely need. I just would suggest you close your browsers, clear your cookies out. A lot of people don't do that. Close your windows too on your phone. A lot of people are on their phone throughout the course of a day, and they're constantly, if you go, I'm sure everybody's familiar, if you hit that little square icon at the bottom that most phones have, you can see how many windows you have open. And a good hacker can get in there if one of those windows you signed in, even if your password is encoded, they have ways of accessing your personal information. So I would suggest, if you're like me, who does shop online, pays bills online, I'm sure we all do to an extent, but I do most of my business online. I would suggest you get in the habit, make sure your browser's closed, make sure you're signed out of websites. That's another thing. People will just leave a website, something that they signed into, and they don't completely log out. Make sure if you're online paying a bill, a credit card, or whatever it is, shopping, make sure if you have credentials, a password, a username and password, make sure you're logged out of the site, close all the windows. All right, that's little simple, and clear your cookies on your laptop and your desktops. Little shit like that, trust me when I tell you, can prevent a lot of messed up shit happening to you. And usually it's that simple. It's usually, something so basic and simple like that they can get your personal information. I recently in August, and I take, measures, and I think I was almost certain I paid a gas credit card bill online, forgot to sign out. Because I'm pretty fucking anal about that shit. I pretty much real specific about it. And well, later that night I had gone to the Yankees and Marlins game, and I went to the concession to go use my card, and it was frozen. They put a stop on it. So I called, and message said to call in. Well, it turns out somebody had tried to use my card to open up some ongoing, like put my card on file for ongoing gas fill-ups. Yeah, this is real. And they asked me if I had authorized it, and obviously I didn't. So I'm just saying that, throw that out there. It's sometimes it's as simple as not closing your browsers, not clearing your cookies, not logging out of websites, shit like that. It could be something basic like that. But anyway, that's what I thought it was. But we didn't get a chance to finish, so I'm gonna go over some of the key points from mine. So just if you weren't here last night, hopefully you might get the gist of it. But again, as I said a minute ago, I would suggest you go watch the first part last night. We got into the 8 emanations of the soul, what it is. We were talking about death, right? We were getting into depth on this topic because, as I mentioned last night, most people, that was one of their main motivational aspects for seeking consciousness and knowledge. Now, regardless of how we raised, majority of us, I'm sure, were either influenced or came up in or raised on different levels of religion. I'm not saying we came up all through strict religious households, but we most of us came up with an Islamic, Christian, or Judaic background in some shape, form, or fashion. Death is at the core of all those religions, because death is the tool by way of fear that is used to control the masses and keep people loyal to those religions. So we demystified first the false concept of a lot of these modern day Western religions, such as Christianity and Islam and Judaism right behind it, that utilize the unknown of death to keep the masses controlled. Now, the reality is this, and I've mentioned this many times before, over the years and in different classes and videos. I don't care what you study. I don't care what you think you know, because what you think you know and what it is two different things. The reality is nobody really knows the exact process of what's going to take place when that moment, quote unquote, of death comes. Now, as I said before, yes, there's many different ancient texts, different cultures we can go into and get how they were trying to take something that was internalized and externalize it and try to give us a general idea of that takes place. Yes, you can refer to the opening of the mouth ceremony, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the various different aspects in there, the Aztec and the Mayan rituals. You can go into the Kachinas of the Native Americans, etc. There's different rituals and rites and passages that have been recorded down, trying to capture exactly what takes place. Now, when we attack it from a scientific perspective, and if we want to get really scientific and we get into the essence of years back, scientists thought that atoms were the smallest particles, right? That turned out not to be true. Then it was quarks. They were broken down from quarks into biabs to zeoids, etc. This was what one termed the spirit realm, because they found out as you kept breaking that down, it was never ending. This is the concept of what they call, quote unquote, infinity. So we know there is a higher existence. Just how that pans out is a whole different story. Now, the 8 emanations of the soul that I'm going to briefly go back through real quick kind of break that down. It also is going to help you tap into understanding how the subjective realm works. Especially when we talked about the kabit, which is one of the 8 emanations, right? The kabit is what the black adept or black magician uses and is able to use that aspect or emanation of their soul to enforce their will by way of their subjective, meaning even through vampirism. How is one able to send, astrally travel through, quote unquote, the astral realms and influence a situation, be it to an individual or a scenario, etc., by way of the kabit? I don't hear nobody ever really talking about that. And as I said before, you can read books on all different spiritual systems. I don't care what it is. You can read books on ancient Egypt, African spiritual systems. You could read books on vampirism, Luciferism. If you can't apply any of this information and factually break it down and utilize it on a regular basis, then it's pointless. All right. So the reason why the video was titled Demystifying Death is, first, we got to, again, as I said before, we got to move the illusions, the false concepts, and the fears. All right. Now, a lot of us on the surface will say, we understand death. We really don't have a fear of it, but there's still that unknown that sits in the back of our mind if you were honest with yourself. Again, as I said earlier, one of your motivational driving forces seeking knowledge and consciousness is to understand this quote unquote mystery that they call death, right? So step one is, again, we have to rid ourselves completely of all the fictitious concepts of it. All right. There is not some unknown place that called heaven that you're going to go to and just, parlay there and do whatever it is, if you're good. And there's not this fictitious place called hell that your soul is going to be eternally damned if you're a bad boy or girl and you're going to be tortured and all that fucking bullshit. That's the fear mechanism. And that's what a lot of these faith-based systems are based upon. I went over a lot of the Luciferian stuff a couple of weeks back because Luciferian aspect represents the mindset that you should take and approach on this path. It represents that God/goddess mindset. All right. That's why I had attacked that. All right. But let's go through these 8 emanations real quick. And if you were here last night and you do remember some of your questions, so I'm going to go through this briefly and kind of get into, the discussion and the questions in the chat. So feel free to, type in if you got something you want to add to it. I will skip personal conversation that you guys have amongst each other for time's sake. I'll skip that. But the 8 emanations, I'm going to go through some of the brief points real quick, just to catch you up if you weren't here last night. And again, I would recommend that if you weren't catch last night, I'm going to read this short section from Mindstar. We were using some excerpts from the book Mindstar by Dr. Michael Aquino, the 2nd edition. He's actually put out 2. He updated this edition. All right. There's a section in chapter 7, From Terror to Transformation. It's a short excerpt I'm going to read before I go into the 8 emanations. The obvious fulcrum of the concepts and processes addressed through Mindstar is the phenomenon of transition from physical to metaphysical human existence, or what is commonly called death. Since death is not in fact death in the sense of a cessation of self-conscious existence, this chapter shines a harsher, more explicit light upon it. Okay. To explode and vanquish the conventional ignorant fear conditioning so deeply and constantly ingrained in human beings throughout their incarnate phase of self-aware existence. Death fear is physical body instinctive, easily the strongest and most unrelenting of all such emotions. Part of this path, as I mentioned last night, is conquering your fears, not just the ones that you are aware of, right? And we talked a little bit about that last night. The ones we are aware of. A lot of us have fear of deep water. A lot of us have fear of heights. A lot of us have fear of extreme speeds. A lot of us have fear of flying, right? I'm just bringing up general fears. Why do we have those fears, right? You have to be honest with yourself. Fear of something harmful happening to you. which eventually leads to death. Death in itself keeps an individual in line, as I mentioned here, to a certain level emotionally. Now, you would have to be honest with yourself. Even if you're on this path right now in this day and time, death is still, in some shape, form, or fashion, a motivational aspect. I'm going to talk a little bit about something tonight I didn't talk about last night, with why there's a lot of working with the death current on this path in different systems with different archetypes. I'm going to get into that when I'm done. There's a reason for this. We don't work with death because it's gloom and doom, and people think there's this dreary, morbid, evil, dark, whatever aspect to this path. We work with that death current for the simple fact of mastering it and understanding it and knowing its perspective. And we come to the realization and the conclusion it's not what we thought it was. You understand? The 8 emanations help you that. Now, if you understand the 8 emanations of the soul we went over last night that I'm briefly going to run through, this is going to assist you greatly in working your black magic, because there is, quote unquote, a science to this. Okay. It's not just I'm going to read a book, read a ritual or something in there and duplicate it and boom, I'm on my way. It's just, that's not how it works. All right. All right. So death is the physical body instinctive, easily the strongest and most unrelenting of all such emotions. Invalidating and rejecting it is one thing intellectually, but quite another viscerally. Even the most advanced and enlightened initiates can suddenly find themselves stricken and terrified by it. So what that's saying again is, even if you're a seasoned veteran on this path, I have to be honest with myself. Even though the many years I've been doing this, I'm not going to sit here and lie. There's not certain moments or situations that I've encountered in my life where that was on a threshold and it didn't bring some type of quote unquote personal terror or fright. One of the motivational aspects of being on this path is to master and understand that while you have that ability, you're here now, right? Making use of your time, because again, you'll find on this path, there's a lot of work with the quote unquote death current and understanding it. You really understand that it's really not, again, we're the ones actually dying and not living. And what we're calling the realm of the dead, as I've mentioned many times before, is the abode of the eternal living. So we got the shit twisted. We think that, and I say we, I'm not talking about just necessarily us here. I'm speaking in general. The masses, people think that this everyday existence is true living in life, and it's not. Okay, there's an illusionary aspect to that. All right. Now, here's the key part of this little excerpt I want to focus on. That's very critical and important. So it goes on to say, so this is not a read, enjoy, relax chapter of Mindstar. It is a rude awakening, a shock that will accompany you henceforth, very much a matrix red pill. Its discourse ranges from the conventional to the extraordinary, pushing the limits of the reader's coherence and or confidence in that of the author. We're going out on some limbs here, but you won't need a saw. As with other super rational concepts in Mindstar, which thereby are not reconcilable by your OU, that's objective universe, exclusive laws of logic, you will need, here's the key, you will need to apply the analytical tool of anamnesis, right? Which is the dialectic precision which will enable you to recognize truth when you see it, and exercise not of faith or trust, but noesis. Now, this is why I had posed a question a while back. What is truth? Is there such thing as pure truth? Is there such thing as an absolute truth? Well, if you understand perception and how most people come to their conclusion, and that's why I did last week when we were talking about the subjectives and the objective realms, most people's explanation or perception on things is based on their subjective experiences. So truth is personal. This concept that we're talking about here, right? Anamnesis, right? Using a dialectic precision of analyzing something to coming to the realization or the recognition of that truth. That's what each individual must do on this path. Not because somebody said it, as it said here, not because you read it somewhere, not because you had faith or trusted in it, just have blind faith or trust in it. That's not what a god or a goddess does. That's not what an adept on this path does. They use this term, which is just a very fancy, technical, scientific term. We use this process or this dialectic precision to analyze everything that's we're taught. And then what do? What's the purpose of it? After we dissect it and analyze it and come to the realization of how we apply that truth to ourselves, we are now able to filter out what we're going to utilize for us and what may not apply to us on the path of self-mastery that we're laying out for ourselves. We just kind of toss to the side, kick to the curb. That's called being in control and the sole governor and ruler of your spirituality, quote unquote, a god or a goddess. So when we say we're a god or a goddess, let me also clarify this. We're not talking about your monotheistic spook god that sits in the sky with a beard on a cloud or sitting on a throne that's controlling it. See, that's the problem with religious people. When they hear somebody say that I'm a god or a goddess, their mind goes spook and religious. That's a fictitious God. That's not a real, that God doesn't exist, okay? We're talking about a living, breathing, walking, talking real God, which is you. You have the ability to choose what's right for you and quote unquote, what's wrong for you. That's what makes you a god or a goddess. And one is able to do that by using this process. It's that simple. We don't, again, I don't give a shit even if it sounds good on the surface. I don't give a shit if everybody else around you is doing it. That's a conformist mentality. We don't do that. We use this process, all right? All right, so now I'm going to skip to briefly kind of get through this. I don't want to stay on it too long because I went over this last night. You could actually watch a lot of this on the video from last night. I basically, again, if you were here last night and you had questions, obviously because of the YouTube crash and we didn't get a chance to get to the questions. So I would encourage you to retype some of your questions from last night. Start doing that. So by the time I get finished with this, if you are here tonight and were not here last night, hopefully you can jump right into where we're at. I'm sure you'll be able to grasp the gist of it, but to go over the complete full spectrum of it, watch last night's video. All right. So the 8 emanations, I'm going to go through them briefly. The Khat, right? Khat. Now, we've been fed a lot of these principles in surface layer, quote unquote, Kemetic information / Egyptian information. Nobody really gets, in my opinion, a lot of it comes off as religious. Nobody really gets in depth scientifically and really how this applies. Why we have to get in depth scientifically on this path? Because as a magician, working your art, working your craft, right? Working, quote unquote, your magic, you need to understand this science. This is how you harness your power. This is how you fuel your intent, by understanding these 8 emanations. See, when we say, the power of fueling a working with your intent, you got to understand the process of how that works. So we're not like they say in the sports world, we're all big fans. We're not armchair quarterbacks, right? Or quote unquote, in this case, armchair magicians. To me, an armchair magician is somebody that just sits on the couch or in their lazy boy and reads a lot of books, but yet he or she can't apply any of the shit that they're reading. That's not what we are. So we're not armchair magicians. We don't just sit back and read a few books and regurgitate a little knowledge and information, and that makes us whatever the fuck we think we are. All right. So the Khat, the body emanation, right? The Khat is the integral with the being's physical body, right? And is the original of what later lesser cultures would represent as the energy body, the body of light, the astral body, etc. You have to understand your Khat if you're going to practice. People say, how do I astrally travel? Well, if you understand the body energy, or energy body as it says here, right, you would understand the science that alchemy was throwing at us through different alchemical schools, okay, of making one's self less dense. In order for you to astral travel or attain as it's saying here, using the Khat or the body emanation to utilize that science or that spiritual system, One has to make themselves less dense. What does that mean? In order for you to obtain that state or that level of spirituality, for quote unquote, lack of a better word, you can't be controlled by your emotions, number one. What do I mean by that? Okay, we're all going to experience certain emotions, right? We're all going to have emotions periodically here and there of envy, of lust, of jealousy, sometimes even a form of hate. I'm not saying that those emotions aren't pertinent on this path, because you need some of those emotions sometimes when you're utilizing certain spiritual workings. But when you have no control over those emotions, is what it's saying, it weighs you down, it makes you dense. So one, the adept is always in control of his or her emotions and knows when to exercise. So I want to make this clear. I'm not saying there's not a time to exercise that spirit or energy of vengeance, of aggression. I'm not saying that there is a time for that. But when you become pure reactionary, you don't utilize those right energies at the right time or the right place, because you're so busy just reacting, right? You always hear the term people say in certain sense, stop overreacting, right? Well, a lot of people overreact. So adept is always in control of their emotions based on being a proactive individual as opposed to a reactionary individual. And understanding the KAT and KHAT and working with it, you would understand that this is the science or the methodology. You have to master these internal things. Make yourself less dense. What can make you dense? Stress, right? Everyday life and stress. When you're completely controlled by your environment, if you're stressed out all the time about family problems, money problems, drama, right? All of these things weigh down on an individual emotionally. And a lot of that stress and those thoughts carry weight. Yes, it does. It literally carries weight. It can weigh an individual down. How do you know that there's not that aspect of weight or pressure in those emotions? Well, the main aspect to understand is this is how an individual is able to have a nervous breakdown, right? When an individual is so stressed out, so emotionally drained, or there's so many things weighing down on an individual and they cave into the pressure, right? The central nervous system can shut down. You can have a nervous breakdown. Some people can have bipolar disorder or personality disorders. A whole bunch of shit can creep in, right? But I'm not going to get into in depth in that now. Let me just get through this and then I will go to your questions and your comments. So that's the KAT, the short aspect, the REN, the name emanation, right? I broke down last night. I'll go back and watch it. As you're working in the ritual chamber, whether it's your personal ritual chamber or in a collective setting with a group of people, you should at some point, this is just my recommendation, I'm not saying it's mandatory, but most people that are on this path would suggest this also. Trust me when I tell you, you should have a spiritual or a magical name that you utilize, right? Because remember, even in ancient Egypt and other ancient cultures, be it the Native Americans, etc., most of these masters / adepts / individuals were known by a name inside the chamber. And you'll find if you've done work with us here, there are many rituals we do when we're doing some form of invoking where your name has to be inserted. There's a spot where we'll pause so everybody can say their name. That's the areas in your work you should use your magical or your spiritual name. Now, having said that, your REN or your name should signify your personality, one. It should describe your characteristics, a name that kind of defines you in the sense that you can live up to that name too. Not just because you picked the name because you like it and it sounds good and it's heavy. Now, this REN thing goes on different levels. I want to make this clear. There's a physical aspect of it. Now, you'll find in your studies going through different systems, elders will confer certain names on you based on different levels of learning that you're going through. And as I mentioned last night, I myself have gone through several different name changes. The name that I utilize now for a specific reason, which I'm not going to get into why it was given, but it's simply, Beniti simply means teacher. The full name, Beniti Amun-Re, means teacher of the hidden one. There's a science in that. Some of you can draw your conclusions. But the whole point is, as you advance or go through changes in your level of learning, usually there's a name that's attributed to that. Now, that's on the surface physically. Now, when I mentioned last night the story of Aset and Ra, right? Where she was trying to get the quote unquote the secrets from Ra. Now, remember at first in that story, Ra, she asked for the name and Ra didn't give the correct name at first. And she knew it was incorrect because when we talked about, which we're going to get into, the ab, well, I'm going to get into that in a minute. She sensed within herself, she knew based on her experience and the feeling and the reaction she got, it wasn't the correct name because it didn't open those energy centers. And when he finally revealed the name, she knew, she was aware. Now that story can sound deceptive because as you know, Aset or Isis is always portrayed as some female, feminine, kind of neutral. I'm not saying docile, but neutral type of character. No, there was a dark magical aspect to Aset. She worked that spiritual magic of wizardry. She knew the sciences, and she felt because of her studies and because of the level of knowledge she attained, she had a right to know what they knew. And when I say they, these so-called individuals like Ra that had a lock on some of these secrets. But I'm gonna come back to that in a minute. All right. So the name emanation, the Egyptians understood the power of names to identify, define, protect, and empower individuals, most conspicuously in the various names taken by each pharaoh. Now remember, the secret name is not referring to a physical title. I want to make that clear. Remember, when we deal with chants and mantras, there's a certain vibration and frequency when you are doing performative utterance, chants, or mantras. So each one of these individuals had a secret name that was conferred upon them that was able to be unlocked by way of a tone, a vibration, or frequency. This is what it's talking about. So when you're reading that story about Aset and Ra, it wasn't talking about a physical name she was looking for. That's not what she was looking for. She was looking for a certain tone / mantra / chant that would unlock or open herself up to the quote unquote mysteries of these secrets that a lot of these priesthoods were protecting. You understand? Or quote unquote keeping secret. Now, as I said before, one of the biggest illusions that a lot of these quote unquote groups and organizations do, they front like they got some great secret. And the only way you're going to get that secret is if you join or become a member. And you never will ever get it. It's constantly chasing an illusion. And I told you before, the trick is, first and foremost, to understand the great secret is there is no secret. That's what you got to get locked in your head. But the illusion is if I could create that there's some type of secret or that I know something you don't know, that kind of keeps you in line. That kind of keeps your emotions in sync. So there's a science behind that. So it's very important and critical to understand that when dealing with the names. All right. Externally, a name can be used to summon or compel, whether physically incarnate or not. Okay. The Natira also have the power and the discretion to give names as well as take them, and through such names to take form and voice. So when you're using performative utterance and invocation in your spiritual work, that's what I'm talking about. There's a certain vibration, tone, and frequency that is said, or the title of that name that is put into fruition to make that happen, right? Now, the kabit, right? And then I'm gonna get into the ab, which is the heart emanation, right? Now, if you do study vampirism, right, you would understand this science, because how does one carry out, quote unquote, I mentioned this last night, of vampiric work. So I'm going to read this real quick. The shadow emanation. This is the connection of the still incarnate Khat with the light forces of the natural material, enabling it to function as the organizing and controlling energy, the individual life field. If the Kabit is destroyed, the life field de-energizes and the physical body expires. In black magic, the Kabit can also be sent out by its owner as an instrument of influence upon others. Hope you caught that. After the physical body is destroyed or no longer needed, the Kabit becomes an avatar of the Natir, Anubis, overseeing guidance of the non-initiate. Consciousness through the incoherence of the Tuat into the stabilization of Amenti, or the underworld. As initiated consciousness needs no such guidance. All right. So the kabit, or understanding the power of that, right, which is the individual's life field, right, and to sum it up in a short nutshell, that's what you utilize. Say, for an example, when you're using you're astrally traveling or astral projection, whatever aspect you want to use, the process still is lined and in sync with the kabit, the shadow emanation, right? Or some will say the shadow self, right? The shadow self is the real you, right? Not the illusionary you, right? The shadow self is something that we ignore, right? As we pretend it doesn't exist. Heart emanation. Again, I'm going through these quick because we already went through these last night. So I'm not going to stay on them too long. The physical locus of individual identity and consciousness, hence the bridge between the OU of the material and the SU of the four metaphysical emanations. It is through the ab that an individual realizes and recognizes incarnate identity and uniqueness. And following destruction / expiration of one's body, it is through the ab that one can re-enter the objective universe as a ghost, through possession or spirit, more precisely merger with another incarnate ab, or through thought transference. Now, I explained this last night, dealing with spirit possession, for lack of a better word, or spirit mounting an individual, or when the spirit merges one with an individual. This is what this is talking about. This is how one is able to tap in, quote unquote, the spirit. Again, I don't really like to use the word possession because it's such a negative word and it's got a lot of religious overtones, but this is the process. Remember, that comes up through the ab. The heart chakra is the key, or the root, or the seat where you tap into a lot of this energy that we're talking about. Now, as I mentioned last night earlier, the story with Asset and Ra, because that's how Asset was able to detect that Ra wasn't being truthful, because she knew that there would be this process would take place. This transference would take place. She didn't get that feeling. So she knew he was not telling the truth. So when he actually revealed that sacred name / tone, that quote unquote energy started to rise and manifest. And therefore she was able now to confirm within herself, she was opened up, quote unquote, to these forces, or use that methodology to be activated, etc. I'm using different avenues to try to make you see how you can connect yourself by using the same process. Okay, this can definitely be done. So people will ask the million, how do I astral travel? How do I do this, that? Well, if you go through these 8 emanations and really understand them, it's kind of going to push you in that right direction. All right. I'm going to go to the Ba, the core emanation. This is each sentient being's sense of self-awareness, of unique and absolute distinction from everything else. Your soul, right? Your body. This is what makes you unique. This is what makes you different and stand out from everybody else in the universe, right? The Ba becomes stronger through increased self-exploration and realization, the initiatory process of Kepper. When you really connect with your Ba, this is what helps you understand or attain moments of Kepper. What is Kepper? I've come into realization, or I've come to the realization of what I really am, or who I really, what I really am, right? You can start to confirm and understand the real you, not the illusionary you, not who you're trying to be and portray yourself as, etc. All that shit that we talked about before in the past. But you now have come to the realization to who and what you really are. You don't identify with the titles no more. You don't identify with things that have been enforced upon you. Part of being connected with that Ba is being able to separate from all of those things and be able to link into what we call the isolated consciousness, right? This is what this is talking about. Very important. All right. Again, I'm going through this quickly. The 6th one is the Ka. The Ka is the complete mirror image of all 8 natural and non-natural emanations. fused into an avatar, right? It is the ka that through the ab that enters the natural universe through identity gates, such as pictures or statues of the individual or utterance of the individual's name. Now you're understanding how you can command and call the spirit. How, whether you're doing evocation or invocation, or if you're working a particular ritual where the ritual is geared to work it up to a point where you bring particularly that spirit or energy down, whether it's in you or another individual, you're getting the exact actual process now of how this is done. So this is demystifying this whole concept of, the fear of known of death and what takes place after it. It's bridging the gap between the subjective and the objective, right? Or the spiritual realm and the physical realm. And that's why on the surface, you hear me always throw out, you need to really understand the 7 Hermetic principles of Tahuti, right? Before you get into all this Ma'at stuff. Everybody's Ma'at this, Ma'at that. Ma'at is dealing with the objective, okay? You're limiting yourself. If you don't master the things on the subjective, which the 7 Hermetic principles of Tahuti represent, if you don't, you're not going to get that full understanding of how they both coincide, right? All right, so the ka kind of connects it all together in a nutshell. I'm going to give you the fast one, not to rehash this. Again, for more in-depth detail on all 8 emanations, refer to last night's video, again, before we got cut off when YouTube crashed. For time's sake, I'm not going to go through all this again, because as you know, it took almost 2 hours to get through it last night. I'm just not going to do that again. Not when there's a video already posted. So, feel free to ask some questions when we get to in a few minutes when we get to some of the questions. Definitely feel free. While the term Sekhem is ordinary, this is the 7th one, Sekhem, right? While the term Sekhem is ordinarily translated as power, this is misleading because it is the power in the very rarefied sense that emanating from the Natiru themselves. For this reason, it is also described as the power of the stars, to which the Natiru manifest in the natural universe. The Sekhem combines with the Ab as in effect a temple within one's consciousness to draw down the essence of one or more adored Natiru to indwell within. Again, showing you the process of how you invoke or call down, or whatever term you want to use to connect with these energies, right? Activation of the Sekhem has another effect. Every incident infuses the initiate with more of the Natir invoked to the culminative degree that the initiate's personality becomes accepted by the Natir, seeing as the Natir sees, speaking as the Natir would speak, acting as that Natir would act. Hence, it is the Sekhem which makes possible and ultimately consecrate the priesthood of a Natir in an individual soul line. Meaning you start to see through the eyes of God. You become God. You're not worshiping. You're not, in a state of not knowing. It's saying you're looking through the eyes of God when you utilize this power of Sekhem, right? That's what this whole aspect of the Sekhem represents. How to tap in to all aspects of deity, right? Once this transformation has taken place, it cannot be undone. As at most, it may be sublimated or repressed, but only at great cost to the priest or priestess' very sanity. Now, this is where I want to be clear. This is not to put out scare shit. Be very thorough and aware of what you're working with, because if you open yourself up to some shit, we've talked about this over the years, the dangers of working with black magic. There is dangers, and most of them mental. Use the word here, sanity. Well, sometimes people, quote unquote, open themselves up to shit that maybe they're not ready for. And usually what causes that, I say, well, how do you know that? Well, I mentioned last night, the very fact that you got to ask the question, how do you know you're ready, confirms you're not. So if you ask yourself that in carrying out any type of spiritual work, how do I know that? If you start, you're just not. How you know you're ready is when you dive right in. You're 100% confident. You're 100% sure. You have no doubts. You don't second guess. That's how you know. It's that simple. See, people ask that question a lot over the years because they're looking for some deep, hardcore, detailed answer. And it's not really a deep, hardcore, detailed answer to that question. When you're in this process, if you're going to utilize this in invoking deity, invoking spirits, and working with different energy like this, be sure you understand what it is you're doing, because as it said here, it can, even though you can't undo it, because understand when you connect with this energy, there is that connection. It's always there. Remember, you can repress it, you can sublimate it, but it doesn't mean it's completely gone. So understand too, are you ready and willing to open yourself up to this energy? And there's a responsibility with it, okay? People think it's just, I'm just gonna go fuck with it, doing here and there. And then sometimes shit goes awry because they don't know how to work with that energy and facilitate it. So it's very important to avoid any of those pitfalls. Make sure you are aware to the highest level. And as I said before, if you got any doubt, if you got any question where you say, how do I know? Well, the very fact that you're asking, how do I know if I'm ready, shows you're not. You know, when you immediately dive in with pure confidence, no doubt, you're not second guessing. You don't even question the shit because you've got a certain level of awareness that you're confident. It's that simple. It's not a deep answer. People want some, drawn out. It's not. It's just that simple. All right. All right. And the last one, the Ak, the star emanation beyond the priesthood of the Sekhem is the Ak, in which the initiate rises to the company of the material as one of their essence, if not of them absolutely. Right. Such one is the indistinguishable from the actual material, except by the material themselves. Such a mode of existence departs completely from all concern with physical displacement, just what I was just talking about a minute ago. Within natural universal references or boundaries, manifestation or action, and affects otherness only by the radiance of its presence. While it does not destroy any other emanations, it permeates all of them, such that henceforth they all exist in conformity and concert with it. All right, that's the quick run through. Now, remember, if you just came in, I just briefly went through what we went through last night. As you know, last night YouTube crashed, and we got through the material last night, but we didn't get a chance to go through the question and dialogue section. So I would refer, if you want more detailed in depth of those 8 emanations and this demystifying death, I would watch last night's video later when you get a chance. All right. So having said that, again, like I said, I'm going to keep this to about an hour to 2 hours tonight. I know I'm usually on here for a while, but I'm not going to do that this evening. I would encourage you, I'm going to scroll to the top of the chat. Hopefully you put your questions and your comments in. I'm going to go to the top, start from the top, work my way down. So be patient if you just typed one in. It's not that I'm ignoring you. I'm going to start at the top and go in order. If you haven't gotten your questions in, I would encourage you to start putting them in now, and we're going to go ahead and have the discussion. So that was the quick 1, 2, 3 version of it, okay? All right, so again, peace and greetings to everybody. If I didn't greet you personally, I know I did some of these earlier in the beginning when you first came in. So again, peace and greetings if I didn't greet you personally. Welcome. All right. All right, so we talked about the YouTube crash. I see some people were thinking along the lines I was. I thought it was hackers too, to be honest with you. That's the first thought that came to my mind. As I said earlier, especially with all the shit going on with Facebook in the last few weeks, as most of you, I'm sure, are aware of, millions of accounts were compromised. It just seems like this is these cyber hackers, man, it's a whole new generation. Whether if it's not Wells Fargo and bank accounts, if they're finding a way to, to fuck with shit. But yeah, they haven't said what actually caused it. And as I said earlier, if you weren't here, I've seen little glitches here and there. YouTube has their little problems here and there on their server, but I ain't never seen it completely shut down like that for a decent amount of time. So I'm sure if something was compromised, and if they don't need to reveal certain things, they're not going to reveal it. Is what it is. All right. But anyway, my boy Peter Gosanya. What's up, brother? I tell you, that's the name, man. That's a powerful name in itself. There's power in that name. All right, where are we at? All right. First question I see here. Duma can read, where does the void fit into all this? All right, let me see if we get more clarity so I understand your question. With the name, well, the first part, maybe I don't fully understand your first question. The second question I do, I'll go to that. Maybe you'll type something down. The void, just be a little bit more specific. You're talking about kind of the blanks in between. So I'll see if you type something and lay it down. So I don't want to go, addressing it if I'm not clear on what perspective of void you're coming from. But your second question I'll get into, and I'll see if you clarify that. The second question you type in, would the name you get from your Agatha demon be your magical name in doing demonic integration? Most definitely. Because if in your personal experience was working with your Agatha demon, your personal demon via demonic integration work, that most definitely would apply, because that is look, as I said before, that is going to be, quote unquote, your most powerful archetype you'll work with. I don't care what system you've worked with, be it the Natiru, the Orishi, the Goetia. I mean, those are all great systems. They all serve purpose. I'm not saying they don't. But you're going to find through your demonic integration and really accessing and working with your real self, or your personal daemon, your higher self, or Agatha daemon, right? Another term. You will clearly understand that is the most powerful deity out of any deity you will ever work. So in reference to, yes, if you in that working, if a name was given to you, and I've heard this happen before to other people, I would definitely utilize that name. I would definitely utilize that when I'm in my chamber. If I'm doing any type of work where it's required to insert a name in reference to myself, because that's the name, quote unquote, the spirits know you by, right? Not this fictitious given name that we're given via birth, right? Remember, one of the things that it was saying in there when dealing with the cut of the body, things we falsely identify with. It was talking about your legal identity. I didn't get into that. I did get into it last night, but the book gets into that clearly. These false things that we identify with because it's forced upon us, be it our identification, right? The state where we live, our religion, family. Not saying that those things don't have a connection and they're completely useless. That's not what I'm saying. But some of these things create a false sense of identity. So in reference to that, and that's actually a good question, most definitely, if in your work you received a name via that process, I most definitely would use it. All right. Corey Knight asks, what book? The book I was reading from is the second edition of Mind Star by Dr. Michael Aquino. I would get the second edition because there's updated information in it. I know some people might have the first edition that was put out a few years ago. This just came out not too long ago. Recently came out within the last couple of months. I think it's a really good book to really understanding your subjective, your SUs and your OUs and how that connects and correlates. I think it's a good book to really understand the process of how magic works and how reaching that state of awareness, or as they say in certain circles, Kepper, coming into the realization of who and what you really are. I think this book is a work in itself that really you can utilize. Now, again, I'm not saying you have to accept everything in that book, because I don't accept everything in that book. You shouldn't accept everything, everything at face value in any book, because remember, even in there, the author himself makes it clear, even challenge some of his concepts. The book I was reading from last week, Richard Cage, The Alter Ego of Luciferianism, he says the same thing. Don't just read one source on a topic and exclusively go by that. He encourages, Richard Cage also encourages you to read a multitude of sources so you can draw your own conclusions, because everybody's going to always give you their experiences based on their subjective. And that's what people fail to understand. When an author's writing a book on any spiritual topic, he's giving that based on his personal experiences. Now, those personal experiences may not align with everybody else's. So you got to take from them what you can connect with, and what you can't relate or connect to, then you just don't. It's that simple. So what I'm trying to basically, or what the author's trying to basically say is challenge yourself as well as challenge the author. And that's the term he actually used in the book. Also challenge his concepts. And it's using that process that we said in there, anamnesis, which we critically analyze and dissect everything, right? And that's why a couple of weeks ago, last week, the week before, when I did the class on being a critical thinker, you must be a critical thinker to work this path. It's that simple. if you're not a critical thinker, it's going to be hard for you to be successful on this path. All right. All right. Wow, I'm already at the bottom, so there's not too many questions. Smooth the God type, no, Straight Panther types in, what are the layman's term for the 8 emanation? Well, they'll use basic English terms as spirit, but like for an example, as we go through them. Remember, we used the Egyptian concepts, right? We use, because as we know, really this path has its origin in ancient Egypt. So when the 8 emanations of the soul, as encoded in a lot of the pyramid text and the funerary text, and even in the coming forth by day, we know that this system here has its roots and origins in /Africa, Egypt, and this is why we use it. But when we go through them, for an example, the layman's terms, like basic religion, right? We could just take some of the beginnings. The Khat would be the physical body, right? In layman's terms, right? Ren, obviously, the name. Now, the name, if you come from, quote unquote, the religious basic surface information, they'll say the name, the sacred name of the sacred name of the creator. But in essence, the layman terms, Ren, just simply means the name. But we broke down the name, what that name is on a physical and a spiritual level. Now, they're just going to refer to it as calling upon the sacred name of some spook deity. That's not what we're talking about. The Kabet, as I said before, would represent the shadow self. We use that in layman's terms as we talk about in many different spiritual systems, your shadow self, right? And again, I'm going through this. Ab is just the heart, right? The heart emanation or the root. When we're talking about the 8 emanations, we're talking about where that, we even talked a little bit about yesterday about what the Sufis call divine love, right? It emanates from the root seat of that heart chakra. So when we say the ab, we're talking about the heart. It's that simple in layman's terms, right? When we talk about the ba, that's the soul, right? Now, the soul in layman terms would vary based on what perspective you're coming from. If it's from one of the monotheistic religions, they're going to have their definition of it. If it's coming from, say, somebody more scientifical, they're going to have their definition of it. But quite simple to translate it into basic layman's terms, the soul of the individual, right? Sekem, now, you can correlate this, really just means power. You can correlate it to chi, like in Asian culture. But in essence, a layman would, I guess, you could term this many different ways. In essence, it just simply means your inner power, your inner strength. If you were to put it in the most simplistic terms, that's the best way I would put it in simplistic terms, right? The Ak, right? Which, to put this in as simplistic terms as you can, essence of the individual. I mean, that's probably the essence, because remember, the Ak, as it said here, it kind of ties all the emanations together. So if I were to take the word Ak and try to put it in basic terms, I would say the very core essence of the individual. That's really the best way I can put those 8 emanations in simplistic layman terms. But understand also this, remember, it's hard to take a lot of these concepts, right? Because there's so many different variations of them, watered down from a religious perspective. The unique thing, and the reason why I took them out of this book, or chose to take them out of this book, is because it incorporated science with spirituality. And I think when you do that, it kind of steers you away from being misled. And that's what I thought made this breakdown a little bit more different and unique than other breakdowns I've seen on it. Some of them, in my estimation, tend to be a little faith-based and kind of religious, which I don't really vibe with that. All right, so that's the best way I could correlate it if I had to. Okay, so Dwayne McKay, you were talking about the void, okay, via the Buddhist concept. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a connection there. If you look at it this now, we call it on this path, that void, we call it through via the 9 angles, right? The best way I could describe this or connect to this on that level, if you're gonna, connect it to that void through the Buddhist concept, quote unquote. If you're not familiar with the 9 angles, I would look into the 9 angles. You can find, I believe it's it's a Satanic Ritual book, Ritual of the 9 Angles. The 6th angle is the one I would focus on, because the Buddhist concept of the void is very similar to that. That stasis or that void, we always teach on this path, there's tremendous growth in that void, and everybody's gonna always run into that point where you're gonna have to deal with that. It's unavoidable. Some refer to it as stagnation. Somebody had typed in earlier. Some even correlate it to death, not a physical death. That void or that space or that gap represents so many different things to an individual on this path and going through that particular journey. All right. Hold on one sec. I just want to check to see if I believe it's in that book. But I definitely would look up the 6th angle if you're not familiar with it. Hold on one second. Yeah, it's in the companion to the let me make sure I got it here. Yeah, I think it's the companion. Hold on one second. Yeah, companion. I thought I had it right over here. But anyway, it teaches you the same way in the 6th angle, that up, that up and down, that I don't know if you can describe it as an emptiness. Some have, and I can't recall the word they use in Buddha. I believe it's sunyata. I can't remember. I might be pronouncing that wrong, butchering it. It refers to the up and down of the emotions. It refers to trying to connect with the multiplicity of the different aspects of things. Now that can bring on that stasis or that stagnation or that void of how we correlate and connect with it, quote unquote, on this path. But long story short, there is a connection with that. And that is a good, it is the companions, Satanic Rituals, the companions to the Satanic Bible. It's in there. The 9 angles. Again, the 6th angle is the one that I would look into that really kind of is similar to that Buddhist concept of void. And I believe the word is sunyata, if I'm saying it right. Again, I could be butchering that. If I am, apologize. But yes, that's a good correlation, a good connection. And one will always deal with stasis on a multitude of levels on this path. But we're taught to reflect, and we actually did sometime earlier this year. I believe it was the beginning of this year. We did the ritual of the 9 angles. We focused on that 6th angle, which can represent stagnation, stasis, death. But in that death and stasis, right, is regeneration and renewal, right? So even when you look at the Buddha, when one goes into that void, right, there's a lot of tremendous growth and learning in quote unquote that what we're terming that void or emptiness. Because in that void of emptiness, there's no limitations. One also in a state of stasis and stagnation has time to stop now and think. Sometimes we need that void, because when I look at that void via the 6th angle, I look at it as an opportunity of regeneration and renewal. And sometimes we hit that void because it's time for us to die a certain death. And I'm not talking about physically, I'm talking about spiritually. It's time for a change. So we tend to go into that state of void or stasis because we need to go through that experience. That's basically how we connect with it via the 6th angle, multitude of levels. All right, I don't see any other questions. So I'll give people opportunity. If there is not any more questions, I'm pretty much going to wrap it up. But if somebody has questions, feel free to type in. I'll wait for a minute or two. I don't really see any other questions. That's not too many. Very short chat. Now, again, if you were here last night and you had typed in a question and we didn't get a chance to get it, I would type that in, but I'll wait another minute or so. If there is no more questions, I think we will wrap it up. I just, again, last night, because of the YouTube crash, which we didn't get a chance to do this portion. That's kind of the reason why I came on tonight. I don't really come on Wednesday. Starting next week, I'll go back to the regular Tuesdays. I'll stay in line with that Tuesday evening, 7:30. That'll be the next time. And that's pretty much it. Let me see if I missed anybody's question. I don't think I did. I think that's pretty much it. I don't see anything I missed. All right, so I'll wait another minute. If anybody, again, this is the last opportunity. If anybody has any questions, I go ahead and type them in. If not, I will wrap it up. Okay, I do remember this question, Ghetto Saucer. I was asleep, so I missed this live until now. All right, so I guess you were aware that the YouTube crashed. That's kind of what happened last night. All right, I do remember this question, seeing it, about a sense of awareness in death. Now, just so I'm clear on the perspective you're coming from, when you're saying awareness of it, saying this is, are you talking about on a daily basis, be it every aspect of your life, ritualistically, in general? I just want to make sure we're clear. I was talking about that a little bit earlier. I think we're all aware of it on a multitude of levels, not even just from a spiritual or magical perspective. I think a lot of it on the surface, the awareness of it ties into our personal fears. And as I was saying earlier, whatever fears we might have on the surface that we're aware of, there's two ways to look at this awareness. When we look at it on the surface level, right, most of us have fear of certain things. And I was using basic things like height or fear of flying, et cetera, because what is the root behind that fear? Death. So that could be on the surface. Okay, you typed, I don't have an awareness of life per se. Oh, true, and that's an excellent question. Well, look at it like this. All right, when we talk about consciousness, right? That's a real good question. You got to look at this two ways. I always explain this one, and this is a good question. I always explained this years ago to use a metaphor. There's a couple ways to look at this. Like you say, you don't have awareness of life prior to being born, but you really don't even have awareness of life even when you were first born until that awareness was brought to your attention. Let me explain. Let's use how a lot of us were introduced, for an example, to the concept of God or the Creator, right? Now, most of us didn't have an awareness of what that was. If we came up through a religion, and most of us did, we got to a certain age where reached a certain age and we were sat down and somebody, be it a teacher, a parent, or whatever, sat down at one point when we can recollect, and we were at an age of awareness where we could understand, or a certain maturity level, where they introduced this concept, quote unquote, of God. And I would always pose the same question. Well, if that's when I became aware, say at 6 or 7, well, did God exist prior to that awareness? Right? Of course, the answer is yes. Now, just because per se, we say that based on consciousness, because consciousness permeates everything in the universe. That awareness is always there, but at the stage we tie into it is going to vary. So even though you may not have on the surface, you didn't have an awareness of life, obviously, and that is true. But you have to look at it when we understand what we're composed of. And that's why I went through the 8 emanations, right? Because when it talked about this process going through all 8, you can even draw the ones that are still not physically here. What it's saying is consciousness and energy, it never dies. It's always, you always have the ability to tap into it, right? Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum's book, I would look into this book, and it'll give you a lot of answers to questions like that, dark light consciousness, where he talks about everything that we're talking about now. We can't look at it like there was a starting point. This is what actually permeates everything in the universe. Some call it consciousness, right? Some will say The neuromelanin is the function aspect, or the highway, as Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum refers to, which brings that consciousness to our awareness, via the nerve, through the cerebellum on the spinal cord, a mental awareness that even existed before we were physically born. Right. This is important to understand. So you can tap into that awareness via your ritualistic work. Right. This is why people have recollections of, quote unquote, and I don't want to get into depth with that right now, past life existences, right? You're going to find out, you hear the term "you will always hear." Well, you're going to find out, it doesn't just mean physically. There was a movie, I can't think of the name of it, which actually portrays this. It was a movie Johnny Depp did not too long ago. I can't remember the name of it. Somebody maybe can help me out. Where he passes on, but they prove that even though he passes on, consciousness lives eternally. And each individual has the ability to tap into that consciousness. Somebody, if they can remember the name of that movie, help me out with that. But you will find they were trying to show and explain something there. So in a nutshell, the awareness is always there, even though you just have forgotten. It's not that you weren't aware of, per se, life prior to being born, because life basically is existence. You always have existed. Transcendence. Thank you. My wife just told me Transcendence was the movie with Johnny Depp. I would, if you have not seen it, what year did that come out? All right. It came out a couple years ago. I think maybe 2-3 years ago, something like that. 2014. All right. So it came out like 4 years ago. I would look at that movie to understand, because when in Transcendence, now it's coming back to me. I remember it since my wife told me. He comes to the awareness of things, quote unquote, when he attains that higher state of consciousness. He comes to the awareness of things that he had I don't want to say had no clue of, but he uses the term that he forgot. Because when you transcend the, quote unquote, I'm using basic terms, the lower self, it brought him to a whole nother level of awareness. And then the whole movie is based on how you can, quote unquote, live on forever via your consciousness. So what the movie shows is the physical body might, fade, but they're trying to show you in the movie from a scientific perspective, consciousness lives on forever. And through that consciousness is that awareness. The awareness is always there. It's just we've forgotten on so many different levels by various forms of indoctrination. But you'll find out through your meditations, through your work, through the different things that you do spiritually, you start a lot of those. And this is a really good question. Believe me, I could be talking about this shit for hours. You will come via your work. You start to come to the awareness of stuff like that. You start to come to the awareness that you always were, right? You start to realize your existence doesn't have a beginning or an end. See, when we use those terms, life or physical birth, and I know that's not how you meant it, but when the surface individual looks at it, we're subconsciously putting a time frame and a beginning and an end. What that does, whether you're conscious of it or not, it kind of shuts the brain down from functioning, because even though on the surface you might be saying, oh, I understand, there's no beginning, there's no end, the subconscious is not registering it. You've stamped in the subconscious mind this concept of beginning or end, right? So when we say birth and death, we have to be careful of how we say that and from what perspective. And again, I'm speaking in general, not just from your comment. I know how you meant the question, trust me. But when we say birth or death, we have to be careful, because subconsciously we're stamping in the subconscious a beginning and an end. Because what really is birth? We find out we've died many deaths, and we've regenerated or renewed. Now, when you go into the whole, like it's in the, I believe the 7th, we actually use this in the Black Mass of Set. I believe it's scroll 7 in the Coming Forth by Day, the 7th papyrus, where it talks about, I am like the serpent or the snake that sheds its skin every night and regenerates a new layer of skin every day. That's symbolic of regeneration and renewal, right? This is a constant process. This is really the process of the universe, whether we're talking about spiritually or physically. Because remember, when we're saying born or birthed, right? If there's multiverses, right? When we're talking about multiverses, because when we say subjective realms with a plural, we're not limiting ourselves here. When we're saying that there's a multitude of universes, right? We have to take into account, and again, I'm trying to explain this as simple as I can because I don't want to go sound, space cadet to some people that may not be following. We have to be able to understand we're dealing with a multitude of levels of consciousness and existence. And step one starts with you understanding your existence. So what I mean by that is you have to really do some internal work to find out, where your place in that existence is and how you raise yourself up to the awareness of that existence. And you're going to find out, just like I can only attest to my experiences and people that have had similar, we've always been here. You understand? This whole illusion that it ends, that there's a beginning and an end, and you're going to go to this place when it's all said and done, that's a trap to keep you diverted from really understanding what this is about. Because if you knew these truths, right, religion would go out of business. If religion just came out and said, well, this is the real deal, all this religious shit, God, devil, good, bad, beginning and end is false. The reality is you are just energy. You've always existed, and you cannot destroy energy. Energy will always find a way, you understand, to resurface on some level, right? The Rosicrucian order, and I can attest to this, being 11th degree, they talk about the vital life force, right? And they even refer to it as the etheric essence or the etheric body of you, the existence of you. That ether or energy is something that can never be destroyed. So when you hear the term in alchemy that you're a being of light and energy can never be destroyed. It constantly remanifests, right? So we use the term called Kepa, to remanifest. How can you remanifest something, right? You remanifest something is you take what you see, what was wrong in it per se, and you remanifest it to suit your needs, right? We use that in the terms on this path, right? We say Kepa or we say to remanifest, right? You'll hear those terms used interchangeably. Well, this is what it was talking about in alchemy. When they talk about the etheric self, right? Or the etheric essence, or sometimes referred to as the vital life force that permeates everything in the universe, right? The ethers, right? This is what this is talking about. In essence, that's what we are, right? In Dark Light Consciousness, Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum goes into that in depth, and he ties it into neuromelanin and neuromelanin, right? Dr. Sabi would talk about what? Carbon, right? And how that was, the very core essence and connection, quote unquote, to melanin. Dr. Edward Bruce Bynum, that dark light consciousness, or that light that shines in the darkness, that's what he was talking about. And I would definitely suggest everybody, and you hear me mention that book a lot, I would definitely go read that book, because that book will give you a lot of clarity on questions like that, because he's coming from, and as I mentioned before, he's one of the few that I see that ties science, even medical aspect in it, with the spiritual aspect. And I think it's a good combination, much needed. So hopefully that pushes you in the right direction. All right. What else we got? Regina Green Tyson, sometimes you'll come to find out that death is a change that signifies a lifetime. And that's true. Let me put it this way. That's a good point too, because that's what I mean when I say you die many deaths in your lifetime. We're not just talking about physical deaths. Just analyze, depending on how old you are, this is going to vary, right? Just analyze the different changes that you've gone through in your life, as far as, let's just say, lifestyle and spirituality, right? Why does one go through the change, right? Because you pretty much have gotten out of something that you can get out of it, or you pretty much have burned out the core of what you can get out of it. There's no need for it no more. So it becomes dead to you. For an example, if you were raised Christian, right? At some point you came to the awareness where you were pretty much done with it. You got out of what you can get out of it. It became dead to you. So when you go through changes spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and even physically, that is a certain death that takes place within the self. And that also ties in also to when I was mentioning the sixth angle earlier. That's part of the regeneration, the renewal. That's critical to understand. And that's a process that's going to take place constantly throughout your life. Okay. And okay, when you look at it too as that lifetime, yes. Some people refer to that experiences as they felt like, even though they're here physically, they felt like they lived an entire lifetime and that lifetime finished and then they started and began a new one. I've heard people explain that. Now, also understand when you're experiencing that, you've also cracked what they call the time barrier, whether you're conscious of it or not. When you start vibrating at a certain frequency to the point where you kind of negate time, it can create that experience and that feeling. And that is exactly what you're experiencing and going through. And I've heard people, describe that. And I have even to certain levels can attest to feeling like that. You'll find that frequently. And that can happen to a person a multitude of times in what they're terming their physical lifetime here. But they felt like while they're here, they have lived or experienced, quote unquote, lifetimes within lifetimes. Hopefully that don't sound crazy to anybody. You understand, we're talking about, I want to make this clear. I don't talk about a lot of stuff, but I'm going to tell you why. Here's the reason why. When we're talking about metaphysics, right, or metaphysical things, and a lot of the stuff we're talking about is dealing with metaphysics, right? First, understand the word metaphysics simply means beyond the physical. Meta means beyond. It's just the Greek term, beyond the physical, right? You got to understand, when we're breaking down things that are quantum, outside of person, place, or thing, we're trying to explain a lot of these things from a three-dimensional perspective, right? When we're sitting here having this conversation now, on the surface, most of us are three-dimensional beings that were governed by person, place, or thing. But we're trying to put in that three-dimensional box quantum perspectives. That's a tough thing to do. Liken it to this. What I mean by that is how you take certain languages. It could even be Spanish. It don't even have to be Semitic languages. How there's certain things you just can't translate into a limited language like English, right? We know this. This is a fact. Anybody that speaks a language, because we know English, right, is the youngest language on the planet, and it's grafted from every other language that came prior to it. Like in a lot of the stuff we're trying to explain, and death itself, this topic, demystifying death, we're trying to use quantum principles, but put it in a three-dimensional box or existence. So it's tough because the reason why I say it's tough, everybody's going to look at that box from a different perspective. And I found the last two questions interesting because it shows me that the last two questions asked by the last two individuals, they're thinking outside the box, right? You hear the term. What does that really mean, to think outside the box? Well, that way that you're thinking, that critical thinking, is something you have to draw upon even when you're working your magic. So that's why I found the questions like that good, because it stimulates and challenges the individual to get into that critical thinking mode. So understand that. We have to understand that we're trying to deal with quantum perspectives via three-dimensional or 3D. And we got to be careful when we're building and talking on that. There's other people listening and watching, and they're trying to put it into their own perspective. And we have to understand in that process, and it's fine, but in that process, everybody's going to have a varying degree of perspective. Now, hence, you got to go back to the 7 principles of Tahuti, why I always refer to it. The doctrine of vibration, right? Rhythm and vibration. Everybody's going to perceive things on a level of varying degrees. And how they perceive that is going to be how their vibration taps into it. Because we could be talking about stuff like this, and as I said before, we're going to have a multitude of perspectives on it. So we as long as we're aware of that, and actually, as we're talking about this and approaching this is very Luciferian in nature, right? This is how a Luciferian seeks enlightenment. Everything we basically discussed lines up with the core principles of Luciferianism, right? And that's why I had said a week or two ago, actually Richard Cage, I took an excerpt from his book a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about we even have to be careful on this path. I know we like to use the term left-hand path practitioners, and that's fine. But he even in his travels, and I've seen it, and I can attest to this, and some of you might have the same experience. Even people on the left-hand path that practice Luciferianism kind of have a one-track mind to what Luciferianism is to them. True Luciferian has no boundaries, right? And I use the example for an example. If some people still feel the need, quote unquote, to invoke and have some external image of a deity that they have to focus on, even though per se I don't work with it like that, and even per se Richard Cage in the book says he doesn't. But if you choose to do that, that's your entitlement, right? I say that to say, in reference to perception, this is whatever you want it to be. And I don't say that to just throw some random shit out there. This is whatever you want it to be, because what you want it to be or need it to be is going to be sufficient for you. But in that process, understand that just because the way you've mapped it out for yourself, you also have to come to the realization that the next individual may not have the same outlook, and that's okay, and vice versa. It goes both ways. As long as we understand that perspective and concept, we can dialogue, because there's not one particular answer to certain questions. See, sometimes, and that's why I said, I posed this question many times over years: what is absolute truth? Is there really such a thing? I'm not talking about, I know they say it, truth is truth. The question I always pose them: what is truth? Because truth, you cannot say factored in the truth that perception doesn't play a part. Because what's truth to one individual may not be true to the next. That's a reality. So just because you make a statement, right? Somebody can make a statement in a dogma or religion or a spiritual system, and now such and such, and this is the cold hard truth, or this is the truth, right? That's not necessarily right. There's a multitude of dynamics to that, so we got to be careful with that when we make statements with that. But in essence, hopefully we get the point. All right, I don't see any more questions, so I'll give anybody else an opportunity. If there's any other questions, feel free. I'll wait a minute. I'm about to wrap this up. But those were good questions, and that's the type of stuff we got to start thinking about. Not that you're going to need to think about that type of stuff moving forward on this path. All right. Pardon me. I am tired. Been a long day today. All right. I don't see any other questions. Anyway, I would again encourage people, though I went through this briefly, I would encourage you to go to last night's video. The 8 emanations was gone through in detail. We went through different concepts of death. We went through first step of demystifying death is ridding yourself again of all the Western traditional religious aspects of what death is. That's the killer for most of us here in the West, because a lot of us were born and birthed into that illusionary religious concepts. Most of us were. That's step one, understanding and just totally ripping apart those all those misinformation. But go through the video. If you weren't here last night, I would encourage you to go watch that. All right. So having said that, I will be back on. Try it again, like I pretty much have been doing for the last month and a half to 2 months. Tuesday nights at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time is kind of the regular time I come on and do a live. So I'll be back on Tuesday evening, 7:30. I got my little guy's birthday tomorrow. He's going to be 5. So then I got my big guy. He's not a little guy no more. The big one. His next week. They 8 days apart. So we're going to be busy with that next 8 days. But I'll be back on Tuesday evening, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you need to hit me up, the email is in the description box. If you need information for the event coming up at the end of the month, you got to do is shoot me an email. If you want to book a consultation or a spiritual reading, hit me up for that, the same email address. Again, with the readings and the consultations, I ask you to give me at least 48 hours. Right now, I'm pretty much on point. I'm 2 days apart from, as far as consultations is concerned. But anyway, the email is in the description box for any of those things, or if you just need to hit me up. Again, I try to get back to most people. It's hard for me to answer every email. It's a little bit difficult, but I do try to do my best. You can email me at khnum19@gmail.com. Other than that, peace, and I will see everybody next Tuesday evening. All right, peace.